All right, welcome for those of you who are joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We'll give it a few minutes here, probably about 1 or 2 more minutes before we start. Let some others join here. There's several entering the room right now. So again, 1 or 2 more minutes and we'll go ahead and begin. Thank you. All right, well, hello everybody. It's great to be with you. My name is Brian Lepre. I'm the Senior Director of Industry Engagement here at the Apparel Impact Institute, and looking forward to our session today. Apologies, I am fighting some allergies here, so I apologize. But again, looking forward to our session. For those of you joining us from several different time zones, thank you. For those of you who are up late, those of you who are it's early morning, greatly appreciate you joining us today. And with that, here's a quick introduction to our agenda for today's session. We'll do some quick introductions. We'll talk about AII. And then the rest of the time will really be focused on our new supplier engagement strategy and the work that we're looking to take forward here in 2024 and beyond. A few minor housekeeping things. This session is being recorded, so for those who are unable to attend, for those who would like to have this shared, we'll go ahead and make that available after today's webinar. Please, throughout the session, use the question and answer feature that is being monitored. We have question and answer session time held for the end. So what we will look to do is have that towards the end of today's session, where we'll go ahead and answer all those questions. So hold those until the end. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to my colleague, Andres.
Sure. Thank you, Bryant. I'll quickly introduce ourselves, and I think we have a nice visual that also introduces the industry engagement team. So as following Bryant's leadership, my name is Andres. I manage stakeholder engagement, and I'm based in London, UK. Stakeholder engagement comes with a bit of brand and supplier engagement support, but to a greater extent, my scope is the management of our NGOs and ecosystem leaders in the industry, such as Cascale, Textile Exchange, CDHC, the UNFCCC, with the objective really of reducing those redundancies, or aiming to reduce those redundancies and all those tools and programs, and making the factory journeys smoother, but also trying to position AII strengths more. And I'm sure they know Bryant and Disha. If you don't know Disha, she's our supplier and manufacturer engagement based in New Delhi, India. And our email's right there. So I'll quickly expand on some of AII's DNA. If you ask the industry now, who is AII, they will probably say we deploy solutions to decarbonize the apparel industry. That is true. From a more perhaps technical standpoint, we're a global nonprofit registered in the US, but we're a very remote team. I think we're covering most time zones, and our program operations have reached 31 regions, I think, but we'll get there soon enough. And our mission is to identify, fund, scale, and measure positive impact in the form of climate solutions, proven climate solutions to decarbonize supply chains. So we consider ourselves a leading industry convener that aligns the leaders of the industry, the influencers, the spearheads, with the biggest opportunities for these decarbonization efforts at a facility level. But we can't do this alone. As you can see in the visual to the right side, Apparel Impact Institute is in the center of many different stakeholders and partners. Our two key features, which are the climate solutions portfolio This is where we store and register the solutions that we identify. How do we fund them? With the Fashion Climate Fund being that second feature. And the most direct engagement, our closest partners and stakeholders are the ones you see on the superior part of the visual: brands and retailers, qualified implementation program partners, on-the-ground solution providers and experts, philanthropic partners and donors, and the manufacturer and supplier universe. But we also have, maybe not as direct, I would say indirect engagement with policy, consumers, communities. We're part of these conversations, but these are not necessarily our direct day-to-day engagement. So that's a bit of the who we are in DNA. In a nutshell, what we do, the identify, fund, and scale part. On the identify, what do we identify? We not only identify, but we also validate opportunities that align with current industry roadmap of proven greenhouse gas emission reduction, being one of our key KPIs of success. What do we fund? Two different sources here: catalyze industry and philanthropic funding, and organize the deployment of these to pre-seed innovation, program testing or modeling, de-risking, and accelerating those that are already validated impact programs. Speaking of accelerating, scaling is next, right? What do we scale? The implementation of those programs that are validated or proven in their greenhouse gas emission reduction potential, science-based, measurable, profitable or accessible, and globally scalable. What is our framework, or how would you see we focus impact at AII? And we look at climate holistically, but we're also very clear on our priorities. So priority one at the moment is carbon reduction being our primary area, the key KPI of success to make sure AII is doing what we're setting to do. But there are intersectionalities and unlocks to be made further along the way to the secondary impact areas that you see there that range from water to biodiversity and deforestation, which I know could be strategic topics or topics of interest, even unlocking more of the social lever within the transition of the industry, which we know are also strategic topics to some of our brands and suppliers. So that's a framework, carbon emissions being the primary focus or primary measure of success. And then if we zoom out, this is a systems view of the Fashion Climate Fund. If we start on the left-hand side, coming back to the funding part of our DNA, looking to have the brands and retailers and the philanthropic funding funneled in for that 250 million Fashion Climate Fund, which we aim being seed money to then unlock the 2 billion needed in blended capital from now until 2028, 2030, already getting the anxiety that this is closer than we think it is. But that is visualized in that pie chart of 2 billion blended capital unlocked by the 250 million Fashion Climate Fund that is being allocated to a certain extent in grants for solutions ready to scale, direct program budgets, and then the blended capital mechanisms, which are the second portion of the visual towards the right side, including the blended capital linked to the fund, managed by external partners, banks, private equity, impact investment funds, also with a global scope. And just to make sure we have a clarity in the 2 billion math. So it's funding outside of AII, 1.75, debt and equity, 1.6, and the supplier program budget, the 150 million there. That's a systems view, but that we could expand on future engagement days that are focused on finance. But today has a focus on supplier engagement and their journey. So up next, we can jump in on methodology and programs at AII. So now, speaking directly to the suppliers in the call, the focused and science-based approach that we give it really begins from a roadmap to net zero report that we launched in collaboration with the World Resource Institute and close partners, that one of its key highlights or features was this tier roadmap layout of greenhouse gas emission concentrations per tier and the decarbonization levers that are these horizontal levers that you see underneath each tier as giving us the direction from now until 2030. So the useful insights here that have just directed our decision making are seen with, for example, the fact that tier 2 concentrates the highest carbon emission potential. Therefore, our operations, our registry of programs, our efforts to scale them has been focusing historically on tier 1 and 2. And you could see the current focus there of maximizing material efficiency under tier 2, maximizing energy efficiency under tier 2, eliminating coal and material and product manufacturing. And you also have renewable electricity there, which does not mean that we're not opening up our scope across the tier or the product or the full supply chain. This is where the climate solutions portfolio objective of developing and its open call for solutions will also be helping us gain more and more scope of the solutions out there. But we want to make sure that our primary impact area of emission reduction is also being a priority in the way we scale and what we decide to scale. Up next, if we want to zoom in on the factory decarbonization journey that is part of our overarching carbon leadership program, this is a 5-step process that can open different entry points from a brand or supplier perspective, but ultimately this is at a facility level where we want the action taking. So in a nutshell, step 1, as you can already anticipate, is a benchmarking or assessment step. A carbon tech assessment or a carbon water tech assessment is what we would normally offer in this step 1, where we benchmark at a facility level the carbon saving potential to drive the facility engagement, and we define the next steps or the appropriate actions that we are also happy to recommend. So once you've assessed carbon, next stage is setting those targets based on the savings potential, right? And there are opportunities to align these targets with the science-based existing targets potentially of a facility, or follow the strategy that might be nominated from or trickled down from a brand, or maybe we're dealing with a supplier association and they want to align their targets. So lots of flexibility here, but the main objective is to identify not only the carbon reduction potential, but set a reduction target. And most importantly, not only setting the target, but accompany it with the carbon reduction action plan that keeps on feeding towards the next stages of the Carbon Leadership Program, or CLP. And step 3 is really where the action happens, right? Step 3 is implementation. Once you already assessed carbon reduction potential, you've set your targets, you already have an action plan. Now, how do you reduce those emissions? And this is where we open the portfolio, the menu of climate solutions that go from programs, technologies, other solutions with CO2 in factory level. And you could see a few of those with our many acronyms there. Clean by Design, which is CBD, or a more ambitious Clean by Design Plus. These could have an energy and water efficiency focus. These could have a chemistry and wastewater focus, RETI or RETI, which is a renewables program we have going on, REP, and so on. And this is also a window for another webinar where we could dive in on specific programs. But for the sake of moving forward, we would then close the loop with carbon target monitoring once the implementation is already in flight. And then finally, concept phase at the moment, but moving quickly, at least in the last months, is the third-party data validation portion of this. Our experts on the ground are already validating each step of the implementation program, but third-party data validation is also a priority for us at the moment. So this is a zoomed-in journey of what a factory would commit to in our most ideal case. We would want all factories to go through this CLP, but this opens the window, obviously, for factories that have greater maturities or already existing set targets, and then there's an opportunity to not necessarily convert past work with us, but they might even jump directly to step 3 and implementation if they're ready for it, and so on. So again, more flexibility there. And I'll stop after this slide, but wanted to now zoom out on where we're at As of now, I believe we are operating programs in 31 regions, but this is a snapshot of a few of the key regions. We'll jump in on the strategy later, and that's where Bryant comes in. Why do we choose a region? Why is a region important? Um, but this is a snapshot that we wanted to give you regarding key regions for us and the open programs as well. Feel free to engage with us if you have any questions regarding certain programs or regions. We'll leave them for the Q&A, but wanted to definitely shine a light on where we're at. And I mean, no surprise, these are the highest emission regions, which are our priority at the moment, right? So I'll stop right there and pass it over to you, Bryant.
Thanks, Andres. I greatly appreciate that. And so far, we've covered about the Apparel Impact Institute. We've talked about our methodologies. And now what I want to do is shift the conversation for us. So sort of from the models and the principles and the theories. And if we think about that climate action approach, the 5-step journey, that will be sort of carried through the rest of the slides in today's conversation. But really, if we take a step back and reflect on the organization and the work that we've done to date, historically speaking, the engagement model that we had was very brand centric. It required a lot of engagement with our brand partners, and that will still continue. In no way, shape, or form will we suggest a move away from that. What we're realizing, however, though, is with this new view, we can put the supplier at the center and then start to then build the right strategies, the right engagement models, connecting brands together when there are shared suppliers. And so really, rather than relying solely on brand engagement, getting an individual brand suppliers list, their prioritized regions or suppliers, and then trying to go recruit and enroll. We're looking at this a little bit differently now because the benefit of the work that we've done over the last several years is that we have data and information that can inform and guide the direction of the Apparel Impact Institute and how we look towards collective action for shared outcomes and success. So what you see on the screen here is sort of the shift that we want to start to present based on a lot of the work we've done over the last 6 to 8 months and will continue to do. So where this starts is that yesterday we announced and released our 2023 impact report. You can find that on our website. But within that report, some interesting information is really starting to be disclosed that between now and 2030, the organization has set a goal to reduce 100 million tons of CO2 by 2030. So to do that, we've done internal mapping and started to build models that help us understand to achieve 100 million tons, how many facilities do we need enrolled or in a program, whether it's a tier 1 or tier 2, as Andre shared in that model, and then by which solution in which stage of programming. So if we think back to that implementation, step 3 of our climate action program, whether it's a clean by design program, a CSP solution, a renewable or thermal, we've started to build that out and we have a target number of facilities in mind. I won't share that today, but as we refine that model, that's going to give us and set the core for how we take this forward. So from a legacy perspective, again, I mentioned it's historically been brand driven. You'll see in the model when we get there in a little bit, it's still part of it. It is not a shift away from that. It is part of it. However, we want to put the supplier at the center of that for both the engagement and development of those solutions, knowing all of this work exists at the facility and supplier level. How do we as an industry, whether it's brands, NGOs, philanthropic organizations, have a role in that collective and collaborative action? Again, legacy, brand specific supply chains. Now going beyond the limitations of brand specific supply chains, you'll see a lot of industry data start to come through in this model, whether it's our partnerships with Cascale, use of Open Supply Hub, use of past and current AII information and data. So we're really getting smarter with the information that we have. Fragmented to targeting high emissions suppliers or facilities in those regions, one-on-one facility interventions, now looking at nodes of interventions in key regions. So that's another thing that you'll start to hear come through. within a lot of the work unit within the model that we're taking for our supplier engagement is going to identify 8 to 10 key regions, which will be prioritized for different interventions, implementation activities, maybe gatherings, events, looking at the specific needs and nuances of each region for each supplier based on that level of the supply chain. So again, all of this being rooted in data, rooted in the information that we have to take forward to really drive progress towards 100 million. And then last but not least, we talk about facility scale decarbonization, but now looking at a systems view that can drive change as we think more holistically, whether it's the likes of the necessary thermal solutions, whether it's renewable energy that we talked about yesterday in partnership with Brent Energy, really taking a more holistic view. It also ties closely with the work that we're doing right now with our roadmap. So both our thermal energy roadmap and our energy storage roadmap, part of our climate solutions portfolio, that's helping unlock by region with the necessary information and the intelligence for us to get the data to best support the industry and those brand partners that we have, but also the suppliers being core to this work. So this is that sort of legacy in the new world that we're starting to shift into. And to do that, what I wanted to start to share now is what is the actual model? So if we think about, again, historically, it was a lot of times brand driven. A single brand would provide us a supply chain list. We'd help recruit and facilitate and look at different opportunities. But now we're going to change this a little bit. We have enough information. So at the end of the day, this starts with, say, a universe of suppliers. So as you look out, we know there's, thousands of suppliers around the world. AI can do some data analysis and sorting. And when we do that, what you see on the right side of the screen here is what we're going to start to call now 3 new pathways. The first pathway is past and current suppliers. So what you'll notice on the screen here is there's about 1,000 or 1,200, 1,200 past or current suppliers existing in our AII database for past or current program participants. That could be Clean by Design, that could be RETI, that could be our climate solutions portfolio, it could be a carbon tech assessment. So again, back to that visual of that 5-step methodology, it could be a facility at any point in that journey. The idea here is then how does the Apparel Impact Institute use the information that we have based on that facility's participation, what we can see with their performance and the opportunity to move them to the next step in that journey by working directly with the facility, understanding their needs, understanding what they're currently doing, what might be some of the barriers to implementation, barriers to enrollment, which we'll talk about here towards the end of the conversation, but it's curating the necessary progress to take that supplier through this journey because of the information we currently have at our disposal. The interesting part about this is there's some key metrics that you'll probably start to hear the Institute also talk about. The first one is this idea of a conversion rate, and the second one is an enrollment rate. So what is a conversion rate that you see on the screen here at about 35%? Basically, the conversion rate for us is saying if a facility has completed some form of programming, just for today's conversation, let's say they've completed the benchmarking phase or a carbon tech assessment. So with that assessment, we know their reduction potential for carbon, water, and energy. But we also know that on a scale of 0 to 100, their performance score. Sometimes what happens is if a brand nominates, let's say 10 or 20 suppliers to complete that carbon tech assessment, let's say 10 for the simple math, only 3.5 are then taken into the carbon target setting where the brand is working directly with that supplier to set their 3 to 5 year action plan and the reduction target. And that's for a variety of reasons. What conversion rate is then that's what that 3.5 is. It's you started with 10, but only 3.5 went to the next step. So as we look across all of our suppliers in this current database, that's the journey and the evolution that we're seeking to take forward and drive for the industry. Pathway 2 now gets into what we're calling strategic suppliers. And this category and bucket of worker pathway here is in partnership in a relationship that AII has with Cascale. So when we talk about strategic suppliers, what you see on the left side of this little sticky note here is there's several regions listed. These regions are now going to be a priority focus for the Apparel Impact Institute in this pathway, or as we think about the 8 to 10 high emitting regions based on data that we have and mapping that we've done with both Cascale and Reset Carbon. We've taken the entire Hague FEM database. We've done the mapping, sort of completed segmentation, looked at outliers and different performance parameters, but set sort of those aside. So sometimes there was some data quality issues that were all extracted. And once you do that, you'll identify that these are the highest emitting regions, which, nicely aligned to what we would call as also the strategic regions where apparel production is predominant. Then within that, we also have a list of 1,500 suppliers who we have been able to deem are what we're calling strategic, that represent the highest emitting facilities within that sort of Higg FEM database. So the idea here is very similar to what you might see for past and current, but it's understanding based on the data that we have from the Higg FEM, who are those high emitting suppliers? What region are they located in? What programmatic work might they have already done with potentially identification and disclosure within FEM and other different activities? That's where we're able to take this forward. And so currently in discussions with Cascale to best understand whether it's use of the climate action methodology that we've disclosed, carbon leadership program, or is there an opportunity for MCAP where maybe there's some large suppliers that are represented in these 1,500? Might MCAP be best served until they have their goal, science-aligned goal? And then when we need to do facility level action plans, we shepherd them through to use AII solutions. And so that's what we're looking at here. And the nice thing, again, if I think about this pathway one, past and current, pathway two, strategic suppliers, again, if we think about our 100 million ton reduction by 2030, we know a number of facilities we need. We already are looking at 1,200 suppliers as potentially in existing AII past or current programs. We're looking at 1,500 from the Higg FEM. So we already have a foundation of almost 3,000 suppliers to begin to work with as we think about this. And when we look at the difference between past and current and strategic, there's about a 10% overlap. So when I say about 3,000 suppliers, you might find about 150 to 200 are actually on that list, meaning we've already worked with some of those high emitting suppliers. And so we don't have to duplicate that work, but we need to convert them through a different program. So again, the nice thing is we have enough information and data at our disposal to know which are the key regions, which suppliers or facilities should be in focus, and we're starting to develop the solution. So this is all starting to come together in a holistic model. But again, this nominations plus other is acknowledgement that there are cases that we can't look beyond or no longer consider, where it might be a brand specific nomination. Maybe there's a supplier who's not in a past or current, doesn't show up in the list of 1,500, but is core and important to potentially either a brand supply chain, maybe an industry association, and how that comes together. So we still will offer and still have opportunities to engage directly with those types of facilities and will not set that aside. This, excuse me, now is where the idea of nominations plus other comes into play. So when we're talking about a conversion rate or enrollment rate, our current enrollment rate is around 50%. So specifically, what does that mean? When we're working with our brand partners right now to enroll or nominate facilities to participate in a program, what we see is about a 50% conversion rate, meaning if you go talk to 10 suppliers to join a program, about 5 will join, 5 will commit to the program and proceed through. So that's enrollment rate. What we know then is if enrollment rate is 50%, conversion rate is 35%. The more that we can work collectively with the industry to drive both of those numbers up, get better conversion rates, get better enrollment rates, it actually is going to reduce the target number of facilities we need in a program towards our pathway to 100 million tons. So again, all of this being rooted in data and the information that we know, with the goal of the Apparel Impact Institute being able to help facilitate between brands and suppliers the necessary change and evolution of how all of this work can come forward. The one thing that we fully admit and will be transparent about within this model, and something that we're starting to address and consider, is If we look at past and current suppliers, this is the AII universe. So it's all those who have participated in AII programs. We're well aware that outside of this universe and including HIG FEM, there's cases where facilities have worked directly with a brand in some form of a brand's own program. So there's existing action plans, there's existing data or information. So what we are trying to do is find those right partnerships to say, okay, that's the AII universe. We're not necessarily saying that we want those facilities in an AII program. What we want, though, is to understand who's already done a form of programming, what that programming is, what might be their next step. Because again, if we need to increase our conversion rate and increase our enrollment rate, we know enrollment might be 50% because we're hearing cases of, well, I've already done somebody else's program. I've already done something similar. I've already done this, or I don't need that because I did it on my own. So then the conversation needs to shift to, okay, how might we take you into the next step in the journey? Again, if we think about our 5-step climate methodology, if they've already set their target or an action plan, let's help with implementation. So that's the evolution of what we want to be transparent about. His current view is based on our database, based on partnership with Cascale and FEM, in working to then find other necessary data sources of information as we look at each of these pathways. Then if we double click and kind of take this a little bit further, what you'll see here is a relationship to exactly what Andre shared earlier on the far right side. This here is very much that supplier journey of our climate action approach with the specific the carbon leadership program. What we then know, again, is if it's a past or current, and so this is that pathway here. The nice thing is you see past and current or strategic suppliers are sort of funneling into this regional conversion list. Again, that matches those 8 to 10 key regions that are prominent for sourcing and also emissions. We then understand what is their conversion pathway. They've already done something. What is the next step of the journey? Maybe it's implementation, maybe it's monitoring, but we're able to understand, rooted in data and information, how to bring that journey forward. For those that are coming in maybe in that other nomination category that we talked about, again, looking at it by region, by the information that we have, but it's then potentially putting them on the necessary pathway. Maybe they need to focus on target setting in their action plan creation. Then they go to implementation. Maybe they've worked with another brand. They've already built an action plan. They've already done a clean by design program or similar. So now it's really about implementation and monitoring and watching that progress. So it's again, understanding with the supplier at the center, what have they done? What needs to happen next, and how we as an industry can support them with the necessary resources to make that happen. So this is sort of that transactional shift that we're taking sort of in the legacy work into our new world to take forward for our supplier engagement strategy and the look ahead. What you'll notice on this model, though, is there's sort of 3 exclamation points. And so we introduced this model a couple weeks ago with some key stakeholders at our New York Strategy Summit. And in those conversations, we held special place to understand what we're calling barriers to enrollment and barriers to implementation. And so that's what you see here with each of these exclamation points is we realize that there's barriers in each of these different stages. So again, if we're talking about conversion, why aren't we converting? Because we know there's barriers that we have to address. So for the Institute, as we move forward in our work with our regional engagement plans, each of these regions has different barriers, different challenges. We want to be able to build specific regional engagement plans to best address those barriers by region and by suppliers' needs. And so if I now shift the conversation to barriers to enrollment and implementation, what you'll see on the screen here are actually the outcomes of the conversations in New York, where we worked with key stakeholders that included brands, suppliers, and other NGO partners. And these are barriers to enrollment that are prioritized. So again, if we think about a 50% enrollment rate currently, what are barriers, ways that we can increase the enrollment rate? The things that we heard were the business case and incentives. So, if I do a form of programming, what does this do for me, both from my own operations perspective, but what is the incentive for me as a supplier to do it? What is the industry potentially doing to help me in this journey? That's the first barrier, and these are prioritized again. Lack of resources and support, meaning both internally and externally. A lot of times, facilities or suppliers might not have the necessary resources, the capacity, or the team power to take on some of these programs. And so it's typically been a no. The other thing that became abundantly clear and is going to be part of and key to the strategy for us is, knowledge and trust of AI. As an organization, we were formed back in 2017. We have built credibility with several of our brand partners. We're beginning to build credibility with several of our supplier partners, but that still is a barrier to enrollment and part of how we want to advance and look more critically at by region, how we're able to advance that knowledge and trust of AI as an organization. The fourth barrier was that lack of visibility to progress and success of programs. And so here, a little bit related to knowledge and trust is what is sort of the program or the methodology that AI is proposing? What are past results? And so again, if we think about regionally specific programs, how do we build those local business cases? How do we have a local presence to show a supplier in this region, similar production practices, similar production product? This is the results they achieve. So getting very specific and clear on demonstrating that progress, but also being locally relevant with the work that we're able to take forward. And last but not least, I think market and political forces in this as we think about the work that the Institute looks to take forward. Some of these are just going to be unfortunately out of our control, but they're also realities that we have to understand. And so again, by region, if we think about market and political forces, they vary significantly, things that we'll probably have to be aware of, but I don't know how much time, energy, or effort, we'd be able to put towards some of these as solutions. So what we want to understand then again is if 50% right now, what does that mean for each of these five in a prioritized order? How we take that then by those 8 to 10 regions to ensure we're best addressing these for the suppliers to help them understand sort of their journey, being enrolled in a program to help make progress towards 100 million ton reduction for the industry. So that's the enrollment side of the conversation. The other part of the conversation, though, which is sort of now, assuming they have an action plan, assuming they're ready to implement, meaning maybe they need to switch a boiler, maybe they're putting a renewable system on, maybe they're focusing on efficiency measures like steam trap replacements, insulation, some of the 10 best practices. That's the types of things we talk about within implementation. What are those barriers or why maybe implementation isn't happening? The first one, again, these are in prioritized orders from those that we engaged and worked with is, what is that business case specifically? If I make this change, what are those operational improvements? What are the proven results that I might be able to achieve first? But second, what are the incentives for me as a facility or supplier to take this work forward? Help me understand the external market forces that will influence or determine what activities or incentives might come. Is this going to result in potentially a longer term contract? Is it going to result in better costing? Are there incentives that exist from organizations that help me want to take the necessary progress in that path towards funding these implementations? The second barrier was access to local experts, solutions, options, and knowledge. And I realized that you could probably break each of these those out into their own barrier. But collectively speaking, it's ensuring that each region has the necessary resources, holistically speaking, to be able to focus on the necessary activities for implementation. Who are the right experts and engineers that can help understand and design the systems? A lot of times we're hearing, oh, I was presented a solution or a piece of equipment that has general marketing parameters that says I'll be able to achieve a 40% reduction in energy consumption by using this machine. Well, that doesn't potentially take into consideration what materials are being run through the machine, what types of product is being produced, different production parameters. So the idea here is when we're talking about solutions, ensuring that a lot of the data is clear, aligned to these types of machines, to the necessary solutions that are being proposed. And so that way facilities have access to all of that knowledge and information. The third piece is aligned pathway forward and consistent brand priorities. What that really sort of focuses on is what we're hoping to highlight through pathways one, again, past and current, and pathway two, strategic suppliers, is how can the Apparel Impact Institute in partnership with others, like, for example, Cascale, with the information and data that we have, work together to then bring consistent messages to facilities and consistent pathways to make it easier for facilities to understand the asks, to engage with the necessary solutions, and that pathway forward to achieve implementation. The fourth is access to technology and data. And then the fifth is transparent, aligned accountability. And as we go down the list again, these are in a prioritized order. Some of these sort of in control or out of control, where the Institute can have an informed opinion and help address for the industry. So you'll see me spend a little bit less time on both of these, but again, very important areas that we're trying to figure out who might be best equipped as an organization to take these forward. Access to technology and data. Is that really the Apparel Impact Institute's role, or might that be Worldly, Cascale, other organizations who are sort of tied and key to this work that we can then partner with to bring it forward? Same with transparent aligned accountability. Might that be SBTI protocol, UNFCCC guidelines when we think about brands working to set maybe standards or criteria for sourcing decisions or when they will or won't phase out coal, etc. So those are the types of things that typically would fall in there. And again, how does the Institute help support and inform, but not necessarily play a leading role in some of these? And so as we think about all of these barriers to implementation and barriers to enrollment, we want to build those regionally specific plans that centers around all of these and leverages the pathways that we've disclosed here today. So with that, we have sort of reached the end of today's content. We've got about 17 minutes left, opening the floor for questions. Again, if you could please use the question and answer feature within that, we're happy to answer questions here with the remaining time that we have. All right, so there's a few questions coming in here. I see the first one is, so when we're talking about for direct supplier engagement, who pays for programs? Is it suppliers, or will you ask partner brands to contribute, as with CBD as a typical funding model? So that's a really good question. And what we're actually doing right now internally is mapping to better inform what we might propose is that direct answer. So with past and current, we know sort of what program they've done. So for example, if they've done a carbon tech assessment, in theory, if the next step might be the carbon target setting module, and we know they're a type 3, we already know the price point. So what we're then doing right now is mapping across all of those past and current, which brands are tied to that facility in what could be a proposed cost per brand. So the idea here is collective or collaborative action with brand funding, potentially looking at maybe alternative funding sources. Might it be philanthropic funding with some of the partnerships that the Institute has to really look at a holistic way to take this forward? In some cases, it very likely could be a supplier ask, but our goal at the end of the day is, if we know how many facilities we need to get to the 100 million ton reduction, if we know what sort of pathway and past or current or strategic supplier, we can already apply a cost to this. And the goal is to get that number shared across several brands, where I can then, or we as the organization, can come to our brand partners and say, hey, from our modeling and the information that we have, we're able to see that there's about 15, 20, pick a supplier number, facilities in your network that are tied to these facilities that we think we can enroll. And here's what we believe the cost in 2025, 26, and 27 to be, with their participation and movement through a program or a facility journey, which then makes it crystal clear for the brands. Our hope is that might make budgeting or planning a little bit easier with a clear pathway and a clear methodology over 3 to 4 years of how we can move facilities along their journey with sort of a shared or collective action approach. Well, I will leave this open for another minute or two for questions and things, just to make sure we got all the necessary questions. But if not, always please feel free to reach out to us. We are available and happy to answer any and all. questions and as we kind of think about this timeline for the modeling and brands potentially hearing about the need or sort of request for funding. So the nice thing is this work is happening right now. And so I would expect between now and May, we'll kind of refine the data with the goal of no later than um, June, hearing from the Institute on specifically which of our brand partners are in network. And we'll probably start the test of this with those existing partners that we already have. We have some pretty predominant activities with, just because a lot of that information is a little bit easier for us. We have existing relationships. So the goal is to have this out no later than June, maybe with proposed budgets or proposed plans on how this could come together. And then the nice thing with this is something that became very clear in our conversations with those who attended the New York Strategy Summit was build the models, figure out the methodology, but don't make it perfect. Let it be directional, let it inform, but start testing this with 10, 15, 20 facilities. Don't wait to try to have perfect models and perfect theories and then start asking. And so that's also a principle that we might start this a little bit earlier. Maybe a few of you on the call or outside the call start to hear from us in a few weeks. That's the idea, is how do we start to test this and socialize it more? And so today was really about introducing the model more holistically, more broadly, seeing what concerns or questions people have. So if you would like to, please feel free to reach out to us. And then from here, it's to then take that data analytics a little bit further as a best effort to map for the industry. So no later than June, if you kind of want to put a milestone on that, ideally for those current and existing AII brand partners. All right. Well, with that, we have about 11 minutes left. We will go ahead and give some time back. So thank you for all of those attending. Again, I know we've got several global time zones. Some of you it's early, some of you it's very late. As always, we greatly appreciate your participation and commitment to these sessions. Our goal, and obviously we're always trying to make these more accommodating, more relevant to certain time zones. So as we look out to Q3 supplier engagement specific sessions for engagement days, we'll definitely want to make sure we can ensure more regionally relevant time zones and consistent support for all of those who are potentially in their evenings rather than joining us late at night. So with that, we will go ahead and end today's session. Thank you again, everybody. The recording will be available here in the next couple days on our website. So if you'd like to share this recording, if you have additional questions, please reach out. And as always, we greatly appreciate the partnership and the work that you all do and help the Apparel Impact Institute take forward. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everybody.